Hello, everybody. I'm Tony Beadle, President and CEO of Rockport Music. Welcome to this vignette, you might say, of the early days of Rockport Music and on the subject of volunteerism. With me are Dianne Anderson and Chris Lovgren, who are volunteers from the very beginning. I ascertained a few moments ago, since the very beginning in 1981, and they are thankfully both very much involved with Rockport Music still 40 years later, and it's a privilege to have you both here. And so we want to go into the earliest days of Rockport Music and you know, this concept that David Alfer and Lila Dice had, and they found Paul Silva, and you know, things got going. How did they find you guys? Why don't you start, Dianne?
Okay. Well, I worked with Paul in Human Services. So I knew Paul, and he knew that Charles and I both liked classical music and would go to the symphony. Actually, he wanted Charles to be on the board, and he approached us. He also, of course, people could accuse Paul of stopping people on the sidewalk looking for a donation to see if they wanted to support Rockport Music.
Oh, that's been supported by others. Yes, actually happened.
And so he figured that we would be interested in supporting something like classical music in Rockport. And we, of course, said yes right away. Charles said, well, I'm away so much of the time, maybe you should ask Dianne. And so Paul said, well, all right, how about I have both of you come on the board and then volunteer.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
And what's a chamber music festival without a piano? But every good piano needs a piano technician. And how did we find you?
Well, it was really serendipity. I had gone into Paul's shop. At the time, he had a shop on School Street called The Framery. And I went in, I guess, to get a picture framed, and there was a piano in there, and that led to a discussion about music. And he asked me, he told me that he and some friends were starting a chamber music program that would be held at the Art Association, and was I interested in maybe helping out? I said, I'd love to, and I offered my services in tuning the piano. And that's how it all began. It was just totally kind of a random encounter.
Well, as I told you earlier, we just came upon some early videos of the festival, although 10 years later from the founding, and that you can feel the sense of volunteerism when you look at the shots in the concerts in Rockport Art Association, which is a beautiful room, beautiful building, but it's not a concert hall. But yet, everybody stepped up to the plate to volunteer to make this cultural event happen and become a staple of Rockport summer. And so how do you attribute that? How did the ranks of volunteer, because it was all volunteer, from the board, were your husband, and you served as secretary and treasurer, I think you said.
Vice president.
And you know, you hung in there donating your services as a piano technician to keep things going. And but obviously there was a lot of volunteers. We heard about how the chairs would have to be set up and taken down so it could become an art gallery during the day, and then set up at night. And there were people to do that and wanted to do that. And by the way, the food and the cookies, which people still talk about 40 years later, believe it or not, what do you think made that tsunami of support happen?
I think because the founders were charismatic. Mm-hmm. All three of them, very different personalities, but they very much complemented one another. And I think their energy and enthusiasm was absolutely contagious. Plus, they made it fun. There was so much social activity that went along with it. As they were asking you to work or to set up tables or chairs, they also would say, well, we're going to have a gathering at Paul's Framery on Friday night. It would be a chance to meet the musicians. We're going to have some chowder and salad. The musicians are coming over. Why don't you come? It's a chance to meet them. So they reached out to you, and they made you feel very much appreciated. And it was the excitement of being a part of something that was starting from the ground up. I mean, how often do you have that chance to participate in something that is very exciting, and to feel that maybe you're contributing to it all?
And you were living here full time in 1981. Were you as well? I know you live here now.
No, my family goes back over 100 years here, but I wasn't actually living here then. but there was this sense of social interaction, and you immediately liked all the other volunteers because they were there for the same reason that you were. It was fun. You were meeting people. You all had this love of music, and it was kind of payback for being lucky enough to live in a lovely community like this and bring, in most cases, world-class music to a tiny little town that seems almost impossible.
Yeah.
But it happened, I think, largely. It would not have happened without all of the volunteer effort.
So when we open a concert these days at Shalin Performance Center, I go out before the show most of the time and say, you know, the restrooms are here and there. Don't shoot pictures with your phones. Don't do the recordings. And when I go back and listen to Rockport Chamber Music concerts in the 80s...
Very different.
It's very different. and it's so sincere and from the heart, because it's usually the chair of the board or Paul Silva in many cases. But I've heard Lila and David Alford do this as well. They talk about the raffle that's going to happen, and if you win, you get a gift certificate to Toad Hall Bookstore, which seems to figure prominently in your relationships with the community. One of many, but it's one that seems to be talked about, and it's so, you know, it's so charming. I guess is the word, charming and open and inviting, and I thought to myself, you know, that's something I hope we'd never lose here. Some of it had to go away because we're in a 300-seat hall here, and everybody isn't squished in, and everybody isn't hot, and you know the birds are chirping and everything, but it all has for a certain overall quality. And I mean, how would you say that? How, you know, do you feel anything of that now?
Well, you know,
I'm not looking for that.
We needed a raffle for the very basic thing. We needed to compile a mailing list.
Yeah.
And so we had a questionnaire, and so people could give their feedback to concerts. And then they could also sign up to be a volunteer if they would like. They could indicate any interest they had in helping us in any kind of way, and then give their contact information. But to encourage people to drop that questionnaire in the mailbox, in the basket at the end of the concert, there had to be an incentive. So the incentive was the drawing and then getting the gift certificate to Toad Hall. And of course, Eleanor Hoy was on the founding board and was the director of it.
Right.
So there was always a reason for what we were doing, but I think to try to make things inclusive, you know, and I think that was a very special quality, and I think that you work very hard at trying to continue that feeling now. It's very different, of course, here, but...
Yeah. Do you feel that you might have been better off raffling the cookies and desserts? Because I've heard some legendary things about the recipes and the quality of the goodies.
At one time, didn't we talk about making a cookbook? And
Yes.
Did we ever make one? I can't remember if we did or not. But I guess it didn't happen. But yeah, people who have been longtime attendees at these concerts do bring that subject up quite often.
Well, Chris makes pastry, that could be in any kind of pastry shop.
I know, along with 100 other people.
And her mother. But I can remember going into the concert one day, and this man stopped me and he said, "Do you think you could introduce me to the woman who makes, or whoever it is that makes the poppy seed cake that I get at intermission?" And people would come at intermission. It was so much fun to see who was going to come through the line. And that's how I met Dianne Braff, who comes to concerts now. I hadn't seen her since college days, and there she was.
Yeah.
But people would come through and say, "Does Carl Lobby, are his chocolate chip cookies here today? Or are Carol Yenowin's brownies here?" And you're thinking, here we have these world-class musicians, and the people's conversation was often about what they were going to have to eat at intermission.
They would ask Dianne the recipe for the punch, because that was another big hit.
That gets mentioned all the time.
Punch recipe over
and the
over
lovely
the years.
decorative ice ring.
Ice, right?
Oh,
the ice rings.
That was so important.
Those were among the first things I heard about when I got here in 2010, and you know, asking questions if we were going to replicate that, and how full? I don't know, maybe, I don't know, but I hope to see the recipes are still around to some extent.
Oh, I've been asked. Well, it was Paul's wife came up with the recipe, and it had to be something where you didn't need water because of the back gallery at the Art Association. So if you needed to replenish the punch, you had to have things you could just open and dump in quickly. But that. I think even about a year ago, somebody asked me for that punch recipe. They were having a baby shower, and they said, "That recipe that used to be used at Rockport Music, can you tell me how to make it?" And so,
now, we were talking earlier about the piano, because if you think of it, there was, musicians were on a stage, which was looks like about a foot or a foot and a half up.
I think it was 1 or 2 steps, wasn't it? It wasn't terribly high.
But the piano had to be put on that and taken off all the time. And so that was a big volunteer job.
That's a huge job because, of course, the piano wasn't ours. We'd have a rental piano, and sometimes it would be used in the first half of a program, but not in the second half. And the stage wasn't very big. There was not room enough to have a very big concert piano and, say, a group of 6 musicians. You couldn't just push it out of the way. There was no place to put it. So Paul would, how shall I say it, enlist volunteers one way or another. And people would surround the piano. It makes me nervous just thinking of it now. And the piano's 9 feet long. It weighs around 950 or 1,000 pounds. And there was room for quite a few people around the piano, and they would simply lift and lower. We didn't have a ramp. We couldn't roll it down because there was no ramp. And there was lots of grunting and breath holding. But we made it work.
And then there was a day when there wasn't enough personnel.
And Carl, Lila's husband, Carl, was always around here on the weekends to help out in any kind of way. He went out on Main Street in front of the Art Association and was asking if there were any volunteers that would come in and help put the piano up on the stage. And people came in and helped. But, you know, those are
Well, they had heard about the cookies,
ways,
probably.
the cookies, yeah. But those are part of the way that I think that you got people involved in volunteering. It was fun to be a part of something that was as grassroots as that in a way, maybe whether it was moving the piano or my husband used to joke about how many times he was carrying those big urns of the coffee pots to the kitchen and having to be cleaning out the coffee grounds at the end of the concert. But there's something about being a part of everything that goes into making something happen. And then I used to sit in that art association when you could almost reach the musicians, sit in my chair, look at the room full of the concert goers, listen to this music, and have that wonderful feeling that I had some part of helping this be successful. And there's no way, there's really no, it must be the way you feel in so many ways. There's no way to put words to
Right, it was
that.
a very intimate experience because you could practically read their music if you were sitting in the front row. You were so close to the musicians, and there was just this wonderful feeling of community, and yet there was sort of a relaxed feeling about it at the same time. It was very comfortable and beautiful because of the surroundings and the art association. Less than perfect acoustically, we know that, but.
But there is that certain vibe. It jumps right off, even on the recordings. And people, when they'll hear some clips on the website and go to them, and you can feel the intimacy of it, and really wonderfully recorded, by the way, and great, actually very good acoustics. And you know, but for you, Dianne, then the volunteerism didn't stop at the end of July or whenever it was. It was 12 months a year because you had to plan and work and
well, we'd have the board meetings and to do that. But I guess I'm thinking in some ways it was hard. The founders were people that were hard to say no to. Wouldn't you say? I think that's part of how people got involved. But I remember Paul's wife was the one that started. We needed money, so that was the idea of selling the intermission refreshments to raise a little bit of money. And she tells the story that she called all her friends to be baking, and then I got involved doing it with her. And then she used to say, come the end of May, people she would know would cross the street to avoid her because they figured they were going to be pinned down,
they would be volunteered,
to bake, But I mean, we often laughed about that, but you almost had to harness people in at the beginning. But then once people had a taste of what it was like to be involved, they kept coming back for more.
It was just so much fun.
Yeah.
It was all so much fun.
Yeah.
And you know, today we have volunteers, our usher corps, and obviously trustees as well. But we have a paid staff and everything. And I know that kind of special magic that was in RAA has been tried to be captured in this building. That's why the floor is lower. That's why the size remains what it is. And do you think we've succeeded in that way? Is there any, I mean, we love our volunteers. We have an event. I know it's not the same because they have specifically one job. You're either on the board or you're ushering. Some people do both. But we've lost something obviously and gained a lot. But do you still feel there's that feeling, that original Rockport music spirit is here somehow?
We know, of course, that the Lovgren Award was.
Well, I was about to get to that.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Oh, please.
Well, it's okay. I mean,
really
we don't have to go
admire
there.
the volunteers
It's okay.
that you have now. I think it's absolutely amazing what they do, because I maybe you shouldn't say this, but I don't see how they could have the same kind of fun that we had, because it has to be done in a whole different level. You have to usher people to their seats, and there's different responsibilities.
It was so much smaller, I think, so that maybe a bit of that early intimacy and feeling that you knew everybody else who was working there was something that would be hard to replicate here. But
So how many piano technicians have an award named after them?
Oh gosh, I have no idea.
So tell me how that came about. By the way, we're talking about the Lovgren Award, which Rockport Music hands out every year as a person who's given exemplary volunteer service in a variety of capacities around the Rockport Music campus.
Well, I'm of two minds about that. I'm a little bit embarrassed about it because there were so many volunteers, and I felt like I was singled out for some special award that really could have gone to any number of people. So I always feel a little uncomfortable being singled out that way. But it's an honor at the same time. And where it came from was for the first, 10 or 12 years, something like that, I took care of the piano as a volunteer. I didn't charge for it. And then later on, sometime in the 90s, when David DeVoe came on board, it was his idea that I needed to be paid. Mm-hmm. So he and I'm not sure who else was behind it, maybe Stephanie Wolf and some other people, I suppose the board, came up with this and surprised me at the opening concert of the season somewhere in the 90s, I don't remember where. And I remember, Dianne, because you saw me come in and you immediately, I think it was arranged that you would sit with me, and you sat with me, and you didn't want me to look at the program because it was in the program, and this was a total surprise to me. So Dianne immediately started talking to me about various things and keeping the conversation moving. So I didn't even have a chance to open the program, and I know that you were put up to that. But it worked.
Hard to hide that.
And when the announcement was made, I was shocked. I had no idea, so it was a very well-kept secret. And it does recognize individuals who have been active volunteers, but you really want to thank everybody.
Well, of course we have, and the people that are, we have long discussions about parsing who's a worthy candidate every year, because there are so many, and there are new volunteers all the time as well. So before we close, do either of you or both of you together, if you have the same thing, do you have some big, hilariously funny, something different of all your time with Rockport Music, whether here or at RAA? Any kind of a thing that you recall, or poignant, or?
Well, one episode sticks out in my mind because to me it was so funny, but at the time I couldn't laugh. I had prepared the piano, and Anton Querti was playing, a world-famous pianist he's still alive, but he's no longer performing.
Right.
And he wanted to talk to me about the piano, so we arranged a time for me to get there. And when I walked in, there he was, asleep on one of the wooden pews in the Art Association, which was hard enough to imagine, sleeping on an unpadded pew. And he was wearing bright purple pants. And that just stuck with me for some reason. It was just so incongruous with this serious world-class
a man of discerning
musician.
taste,
And he was very gracious and pointed out a few things to me that he requested, and I was able to do what he wanted to do, so he was happy. But that still stands out in my mind.
How about you, Dianne?
I can't top that story.
Nothing of a disaster or anything that happened.
But I was going to say, she's so modest about that award being named after her because there were so many volunteers doing so many things. But the skill that she had tuning the piano was something so very special. And you have to remember, we didn't have any money then. So even punch ingredients and so forth, everything basically was, donated. I mean, and so to have an excellent piano tuner donate services all those years. So somehow the idea was that award would always represent volunteerism in the truest sense, which was not only just the piano tuning, but the baking and in every possible way. But,
well, I do know that a piano technician goes and talks to the artist after a rehearsal or warm-up at the intermission. You're out here at the intermission touching up the piano or addressing any kinds of imminent malfunctions that may be coming up. And that's all part and parcel of the piano technician on call. And, I see you jump to it all the time. It's an amazing thing. And so I think your gift then to Rockport Music and giving your services for so long is doubly appreciated by all the artists who had tremendous service. And I know we nary ever get any complaints about the piano here.
As you can imagine, it was different at the Art Association if they wanted the piano adjusted, because then if she had to go on the stage and get underneath it to make an adjustment in that small setting.
I don't like that, but I don't like going out
everyone knew what you were
doing things in front
right?
of the audience, but you have no choice. There's no curtain to draw. So.
Well, even today, in viewing a video from 1991, there was a piece by a woman composer named, I think it was Dana Brayton, I'm not sure, but that was all but prepared piano. The pianists had to get in there with their fingers and lay their elbows over the strings and that kind of thing. But it gets worse from there because when somebody discovered a paper clip on a string can sound kind of cool, that's there. And I know that all makes you shudder, and I can see it right now,
yes,
just talking about it.
Yeah. I am hopelessly traditional in how I think the piano should be used, but
but it all adds up to care and maintenance and TLC. So, well, thank you both. It was great to talk to you, and I think everybody's going to have a great time listening to this and just to hear about the earliest days and volunteerism.